Hi, I'm Jeff Stark. I'm excited today to present to you in this video some truths that a client and I came to together very recently. And the reason I'm excited about it is because he and I were able to pin down a particular biblical truth that is crucial to helping men to be done with this pornography and masturbation habit forever. And it was one that he and I discovered together and nailed it down. And I think for him, it's going to make a big difference. And I think this will make a big difference to many, hundreds and thousands of men who happen to be looking at these videos, who have tried for a very long time to stop this particular habit, but haven't been able to. So let's get started. I'm excited to talk to you about this matter today. First of all, my client, I'm going to talk to you today. The video is going to be kind of a flow chart of our conversation together, getting to the point that I would like to get to, that we got to together. I'd like to get to that point eventually in this video. It might be a little bit longer than usual, but bear with me, please. I think you'll appreciate it, what's being communicated here today by way of our videos. My client is about between mid 20s, mid 20s, a single guy. And we had been meeting for quite some time to talk about sexual matters. And they eventually moved into the issues of his struggles with pornography and masturbation. We've been working on this particular issue, masturbation and pornography, in his life for probably a year now, maybe more. That's not unusual, but we were working on it for quite some time. My memory in terms of dates is not very clear. It could even be 2 years, but that's not important. So we met a couple of days ago, and as is usual, I opened in prayer. And I said, well, tell me about how your last couple of weeks have gone, 3 weeks or so. And he began to tell me, he said, well, I got some good news and some bad news. And he said, well, the good news is that I haven't done any pornography in the last 3 weeks. Bad news is that I've masturbated on a number of occasions. And so there's good news and there's bad news there. And then he went in to tell me about his work, life at work. I think he mentioned some things about family and some other odds and ends. But then while he's telling me these other things, two things are coming to my mind. One is, for the last 6 months or so, in my own private thoughts about this matter of men and masturbation and pornography, I've been thinking about an older client, a client that I had quite some time ago, and I'd say maybe going back at least 10 years, maybe 15 years. But we worked, this client and I'll call this client Bob just to give him a name. Bob and I, about 10, 15 years ago, he came to me with a married man, young man, with the struggle of lust and flirtation and, of course, pornography and masturbation. He had been unsuccessful in really setting himself free from this, and we were spending a good amount of time talking about that. Long story short, when Bob and I were done, he was still falling into this habit of masturbation, pornography. It had morphed into some inappropriate relationships with people that he was working with. And that was the end of our sessions together, and we ended unsuccessfully in my mind. I think he would say the same. But what has bothered me in the last 6 months or so is I've been thinking back about Bob is, why couldn't I help Bob? Bob and I worked really hard on helping him to get past this particular issue. But what he would do is he would, like my current client, he would say to me, well, here's what's happened in the last 2 or 3 weeks. It would go well, and then I would fall back into doing it, and I would feel guilty, and I'd ask God for forgiveness. And then so for a long time, he would tell me that he would have periodic episodes, seasons of success, days, maybe some weeks, but then he would fall back into it. And that would go on, and that's what would happen with Bob, is that he would have good times, good seasons where he would be faithful and pure to his wife and otherwise, but he would fall back into it. And so I was unusually concerned about Bob. My clients usually leave having been successful in our time together, but I've just in the back of my mind, I've been this annoying. Why wasn't I really able to help Bob? And so as I'm hearing this, my client's story to me about his last 3 weeks, my current client that I was talking to about Monday night, this client has been telling me the very same thing, and that is he has done well, but then he has not done well. And he told me on Monday night, well, the good news was I went, I think, 8 or 9 days, I think he said, where there was no pornography, but then I did masturbation. I did it a couple of times since we've met since. Now, that's a repetitive story that my client has been telling me for quite some time. He's worked very hard, but he seems to only be able to get to maybe 8 or 9 weeks. And that was the second session in a row where he indicated 8 or 9 weeks. And I'm thinking, so what is it about the 8 and 9 weeks that seems to be where he's able to sustain purity and faithfulness and obedience to the Lord in sexual matters? But there's that ninth day again. I'm thinking, well, what? That's the same thing that happened back then and previous times as well, which would be more frequent. 8 or 9 days would be good for my client, but this is the second time in a row, second session in a row where he said 8 or 9 days. And I'm thinking, what is it about 8 or 9 days? As he's telling me the rest of his week and other matters which are bringing me up to speed and what's happened in his life. So finally, I say, well, let's go back to the original issue here about the pornography and masturbation. And I commended him for going 8 or 9 days without looking at pornography. And I can understand how difficult that can be. But I first of all commended him for doing that. But then I asked him this question, and I put it like this. I said, look, I want to ask you a question. I really don't have the answer to this question. But this is the second session in a row that has been 8 or 9 days. In previous sessions, for a long time, it might have been 2 or 3 days, but you got to 8 or 9, and that's good, and I commend you for that. But here's my question. I said to him, are you cognizant at all as to whether you have a short-term commitment to resolve this problem or a long-term commitment? Because something happened, and I was asking him that question because he's committed for 8 days, but there's something about that ninth day where his commitment breaks down and has habitually broken down. And so I asked him the question, really not knowing how I would answer that for him. That's not was not a leading question. I said, I mean, do you have thoughts or do you not have thoughts about whether you have a short-term commitment to resolve this matter or a long-term commitment? Because if he has a short-term commitment, I'm thinking, well, he's doing a good job in the short term, but he's not doing a good job in the long term. But I'm wondering whether he even thinks short term or long term. So that's where my question was coming from. And here's what my client said to me. He thought about that. He pondered that for about 30 to 60 seconds. Excuse me. And he very thoughtfully said to me, well, I don't believe that I can live without doing this masturbation. I don't think that I can live without it. I don't believe that I can live without it. And he kept thinking, and he said, it's really hard for me to imagine going through life without having this option open to me. It's really hard for me to imagine that I could actually go through life without having some sort of sexual release that I get by maybe looking at pornography, but definitely doing masturbation. And then he said, then I raised the question, well, um, um, no, he said this. This is the third thing that he said. He says, I'm wondering right now, this was a new thought for him, new questions and new thoughts. So we're going into new territory, which is good in this case. And he said to me, I wonder if it's legitimate to never do this again, to never masturbate again. You know, or in other words, when I say no to masturbation, I'm realizing now that that's a no for right now, but it's not saying no about tomorrow or the next day. And so saying no to my lust and masturbation seems very temporary. And I said to him, well, let me throw something out here. And I didn't know if I had told him this before or not. I think I probably had, and I've put this on a videotape before. But I said to him that I do not struggle, or I did not struggle with masturbation and pornography like the average guy does today, because two reasons. I grew up in an age where pornography was very hard to get, and you didn't want to go through the difficulty of getting it and the embarrassment of being caught with it. So it was not rampant as in today. Back in my college years, I don't even think we had the internet, or let alone, well, perhaps we had computers. I don't remember. But the second reason I told him why I didn't struggle with it like the average guy does today is because there came a point in time when God rolled away the blinders of my eyes, and I saw that all of my interest in sex and intercourse and kissing and hugging and fondling and all that kind of stuff was very, very selfish, very, very greedy, and very idolatrous. Or in other words, all of my sexual thoughts were extremely greedy, very, very sinful, very selfish, very self-motivated, very self-interested. And I wasn't thinking about girls at all. And I realized that I was just a better part of my thought life was spent up in this area, just thinking about how I would be able to get some girl to have sex with me. Um, but what I said was there came a point in time when God pulled that back, and I saw all the horror of it. It was really horrifying to me how selfish and greedy I was. And I made a definitive decision to not be sexual on my own or with another person until I got married. I made a strong, hard, long term commitment to not do pornography and masturbate and be sexual with women that I might go out with until I got married. And that was a, long term, unbreakable, unquestionable, without a doubt, a long-term commitment. And so as I was saying to my client, I was making a never decision, not sometimes, but that moment in time, I said, I'm never going to do this again. And by God's grace and with his help, I never did. And so when my wife and I got engaged, we permitted ourselves to kiss one another. But when we got married, obviously we were able to enjoy our sexual experience together and have since ever since. But there was a never to it that was very, very important to me. And as my client was thinking about that, he came to understand that he had never said never. It was always no for the moment, but there was no guarantee and no promise and no commitment as to how he might have to deal with this problem tomorrow, the next day, next week, next month, next year. And he began to he believed that it would be impossible for him to live without having the option of having a sexual release at some point in time, on a weekly basis. I said to him, when I made this commitment, three things happened. By God's grace and through the gospel and the Holy Spirit working in my life, having made that commitment and living that commitment out, three things happened. Number one, the frequency of sexual temptation diminished radically. It went from every other day down to almost nothing. Having made that commitment to never, the frequency of temptation to look and to do things sexual went down radically. Number two was when I did have a sexual temptation, it was very short and then over. It was a matter of seconds and then it was gone. And number three, when I did have sexual temptation, it wasn't deep and long and difficult and challenging. It was very shallow. And with those three things, sexual temptation was almost non-existent in my life. Almost. I can't say it was altogether gone, but it was very infrequent in terms of how often temptation would come up. If I did get tempted, it was very short. It was only seconds in duration. And obviously, because of that, it went only so deep that the struggle was never very hard. It didn't get down to here where I might be struggling with it really. No, it was very shallow in terms of the intensity of the temptation. Now, how did that happen? That's what every man really wants. Every Christian man really wants to be able to say what I said. I want it to be very infrequent. I want it to be very short, and I want it to be very shallow. That is real success in terms of the power of the Holy Spirit, bringing a man away from sexual sin to sexual purity. How did I get there? Well, most of the videos that we've put online here in my YouTube channel have talked about how what the Lord taught me how to get there. But what my client and I were realizing in a brand new way, I think it was new to me, it was new to him. And we kind of rejoiced together having come to this idea, and that is you cannot succeed and you cannot get to this level of success unless you have committed yourself never to the never category. If your level of commitment is no today, but there's no guarantees tomorrow, then I said to my client, there's no way you're going to get to this place of sexual purity. You just can't do it. It just won't happen. I have no confidence that anybody whose level of commitment is only no today, but I'm not making any promises tomorrow. Well, I said to him, I really don't think you're going to get to this place that you really want to get to. It's unimaginable to me that you're going to be victorious in this area unless you go from no to never. But I said to him, the way I went from no to never, how I went from this temptation to having it so infrequent and short and less intense came about as a number of things, but instrumental to my being able to acquire that and to maintain that even after 40 years of marriage has been to make a commitment in my life to never do sexual sin again by God's grace. And with that level of commitment, among the other things that I've indicated in the other videos, I was able to stay sexually pure through my dating experience post that time. I was able to be sexually pure through my engagement, and I've been able to maintain, what I said many times, the tools that I learned then I continue to apply to my life today. And I've been able to avoid sexual sin while I've been married as well. But what the point of today's session here, a video, and my session with my client was this: the significance of having a never commitment to do this was very, very radically helpful to me, and I'm sure it will be radically helpful to other men, including my client and men who may be looking at these videos. Now I'm turning my attention back to the men who are watching here. Men. Oh, let me say one more thing. I said to my client a couple nights ago, I said to him that, well, I forgot. Let me come back to that after I say this to the men who are listening here today. If your level of commitment, like my client previous to the other night, was no, but not never, I can say with confidence that you're not going to be successful in this particular matter. It's just not going to happen. I say that confidently, but I say that for your sake. And I think if you're like the other men, the hundreds of men that I've talked to who've had short seasons of success, but have fallen back into sexual sin, masturbation, for example, and that has been your pattern, then I could almost be guarantee that your level of commitment has been to a no temporarily and not a never. And here's what I was going to say earlier, and I forgot. Um, Forgot it again. Okay, so that was very, very helpful for my client, the light bulb clearly went off for him, and he got a little excited and talking to me as he was working through this. We were working through this really on the spot together. And I was very grateful that he was willing to think about those things and raise those questions. And we were really walking down the path together for the first time as we were having these particular thoughts. Anyway, men, if you're like my client who does well, then falls and does well and falls and does well and fall, then there's a very, very, very good chance that you've never said never in this matter, and you probably not have success unless you do. Now, by the way, where I was going to with earlier, and I forgot, was this: that my client said, there are other areas of my life where I know I say never. He said to me, I know I would never kill my mother. I know I would never intentionally run somebody over in a car. And he said, I know I would never do X and I know I would never do Y, but I've just never thought of sexuality in the context of never. And I said to him, but so let's think about this biblically. I said, that so the never category is not an illegitimate category. We were kind of walking through this together. Yeah, I would never kill a puppy, I said to him. I would never do that. But the never category is legitimate. And we put things in the never category, like killing puppies and killing your mother. So we agreed that there is a category that's legitimate where you put things never into. So I said to him, but think about this biblically. What's the one reason a woman or a man could divorce their spouse? The reason that a man or a woman could seek divorce from their spouse has to be a really, 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 really horrible thing. Because men can do a lot of horrible things to their wives, but they're not allowed to get divorced. The wife is, that is. And wives can do horrible, horrible, horrible things to their husbands, but that may not allow the husband to permit the husband to get a divorce. God says there's one reason why we are permitted to get a divorce apart from abandonment, and that is sexual sin. If a husband or wife commits sexual sin, they are permitted to to go through the case of a divorce. So in this matter of sex, this is a category that is very legitimately involved in never. We are never to commit adultery. We are never to do pornography and masturbation. We are to be faithful and pure to our wives, forsaking all others, never being involved inappropriately with others mentally, physically, sexually, or otherwise, and only being sexually pure and faithful to my wife and my wife alone, forsaking all others. And so I was saying to my client, this is a category where never really is suitable. A man ought to be able to say to his wife, you know what, I will never do pornography and masturbation. That is a total abandonment of my marital vows. It's bringing somebody else. I will never do this. That's what by the way, we vow. That's what we vow. Those the vows that we make to our spouses are, I'm going to forsake all others and be faithful to you. That is to say, I will never do sexual things, mental, emotional, physical, sexual, otherwise, outside of our marriage. Never. Never. That's what we're promising to do. And men, every single time that you do masturbation and pornography, or just simply masturbation, that you're breaking your marital vows. So he and I, working through this, agreed that it is legitimate to be thinking that I should never be doing this again. As a single person, developing a habit of sexual purity in preparation for marriage and to the honor of God. But once I get married, well, I'm never going to be sexual sinful after I get married as well, because that's something that is horrible. And when we get married, we're making promises to be exclusive with our spouses. So we both concluded that session by saying it is legitimate to have a never category. We put a lot of things into the never category, and quite honestly, this sexual matter is also in the never category as well. Never going to commit sexual sin. It's so hideous. It's so awful. It's so damaging. It's so hurtful. It's so betraying. It's so offensive that I really need to put never my sexual life and certain temptations and such things in this never category. I know that's going to be helpful to hundreds and perhaps even thousands of men who have struggled with this, but never and been highly frustrated. Why can't I stop this thing? I think the previous videos that we've uploaded on this channel can be very helpful to you, but I know this is this one is very pertinent. If you're saying no, if you've not said never and you're living out the never, well then you're going to be in this cycle of success and failure for the rest of your life, much to your consternation, frustration, and your wife's sadness and sorrow. And one of the things that you're going to have to do if you plan to get out of this problem, this cycle, is to say never and start to make your decisions based upon the decision to never be sexually sinful inappropriately with before you get married and after you get married. I hope that's helpful. I know it will be. Again, if you struggle in this matter and you need personal attention and personal counseling, I would be most eager to be willing to chat with you in person or perhaps over the internet and using my understanding about these things and trying to help you if you would like to do that. I'll quickly give you a phone number here where you could get a hold of me anywhere in the world. Actually, you can make the phone call to area code 215 481 9878. That's my Pennsylvania Counseling Center phone number. And one more would be 302 area code 478 3848. I would consider it an honor if you were to give me a call and allow me to help you to be done with this matter once and for all. God bless.